Why do you think that women make less money than men?
I think because they're very underrated, because they can do more, but people expect them to do less.
What kind of more can they do?
Well, a lot of people underestimate them, and they could do so much more. There's jobs that men can't do that women can.
Gender inequality is a worldwide issue that all women face today. Around the world, society is starting to realize that women are capable of doing the same things men can do. The stereotypical structure of a family is changing, with women doing things never done before. Boys and girls are exposed to gender inequality at a young age. They begin to realize their gender correlates with certain social norms and responsibilities. Men are expected to be the breadwinners and the figure of authority, while women are expected to take care of the children and look after the home. The time to start defying these social norms is now.
We interviewed 3 women, one a professor at North Central College.
My name is Mara Birkland. I'm a professor of communication at North Central College. I hold bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and a PhD in communication with an emphasis on gender, law, and culture. I have worked, in addition to working in education, at a series of different universities and colleges for the last 20 years. I also had the privilege to do consulting for organizations, writing consulting, content consulting. I've volunteered in nonprofit organizations, served on boards of directors in nonprofit organizations, particularly dealing with domestic violence issues.
One who has been in the corporate workforce for over 30 years.
My name is Tara Peterson. I am an account executive officer with Travelers Insurance Companies. I've been in this position for roughly 5 years. I've worked for the company for 14, and I've been in the same industry, which is commercial surety underwriting, for just under 30.
And one who recently graduated and is new to the workforce.
My name's Emily Saulnier. I graduated Lindenwood University in May of 2017, and I started as a staff accountant shortly after that.
Yes, absolutely. The interesting thing about it is that I don't think most women would say that anyone ever said to us, I'm not hiring you, or I'm not appointing you because you're a woman. And for the longest time, I had I'm not saying my deans and provosts now aren't great, but we had a really great dean who was really intent on gender equity, to the point where it was, in some cases, problematic. If there was a man, there was a woman. Full stop. But there are certain moments in our world where you look around and you say, all of the leadership here is men. And then you have a privilege, and younger in my career, probably 6 years ago, I had a privilege to step into one of those rooms where I was one of 2 women out of 20 people. And it wasn't that I wasn't welcome, but the environment was not conducive to feminine voice. Off-color jokes, sort of man's way of thinking about socializing, like, why don't we play golf? Well, I don't like golf and I don't play golf. Why don't we go to the opera? Why don't we go to the spa? So there are these institutionalized structures and cultural behaviors that really shut out a different gender perspective. And so again, it wasn't as if someone was standing up and saying, you're not welcome. I think at this point in our culture, it would be a little untoward to say that, a little outside of any acceptable norm. But when you think about corporate America, when you think about leadership, you think about things like cigar parties and golf games and dinners out late at night with cocktails, and what that means, who belongs, who that's a safe space for, and whether or not you're welcome there. Even if they hope you're welcome, their nonverbals and their verbals communicate so much to the contrary.
I would say it's not addressed as quickly as it should be. And the reason why it probably isn't is that many women don't even bring it up. It gets swept under the rug. We don't necessarily speak up. I think we're doing a better job as women to speak up for ourselves and bring it to the forefront.
I definitely have experienced disrespectful behavior towards women, and in the department I work in, it's mostly females, but every time something has happened, it's never been addressed, and I think that's especially a problem since there are women in my department, and especially since most of the company is male as well.
Addressed quickly? No.
Or at all. Yeah.
Never addressed quickly. Never. We have to spend a lot of time thinking about the claim. Who might this claim disadvantage if it were found to be true? Even something that I raised, not on my own behalf, but on the behalf of female colleagues a month ago, was pushed back on because of the implications that if there was even an investigation might imply that there was a problem. So there's more concern in saving face of an organization or the men in it, protecting the men in an organization than there ever is on the welfare of women.
Definitely. So one of my main jobs is I have to email, as an accountant, I have to email some of the sales representatives in our company. And I've been working there almost a year, and a lot of these salesmen, they don't respond to my emails. And we recently hired a new accountant who is a male, and he gets responses all the time. And he's been working there for 2 weeks, and he gets responses. And I think that just shows you that I don't get the respect that males get in our company, even though I've been working there longer.
For me, I think I've always recognized it. I've been doing this job for 30 years. The industry I happen to be involved in is very male-dominated, and from the very beginning I was hired in with a male counterpart. We went through the same training, we would do the same works, very, very similar output. We get the same, positive feedback from our superiors, and yet, I was going here and he was moving up at a faster pace. Why? Nobody could seem to answer that.
For this, I think I noticed that gender equality was a problem in the workplace right after I started working. I would get comments from men in our work that I would make a really good secretary, and I think that just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I'm meant to be like a secretary. I'm an accountant, and I get comments like that.
What I sort of got at the age of 8 or 9 that seemed to repeat itself over and over when I would see things like all of the men in the church making decisions while women were in the basement cooking the luncheon, right? That something was screwed up because this was not a meritocracy. This had nothing to do with intellect or capability. And you would see these absolute buffoons of men spouting their opinions with sort of confidence, and you think, you are really an idiot. Where you would sneak down into the basement and you would hear these women talking, and you would see that they were nuanced and complex, and you couldn't understand why it is the boobs weren't making the sandwiches and the intellectual women weren't up there making their points. And then you turned around and you saw things like all of the elementary school teachers were females, but as the subjects got harder and you had, calculus, it was a male, right? Or you would see that all of the doctors at the hospital were men and all the nurses were women, and you started to ask questions that didn't have good answers, at least for me.
I think it's just a old habit that hasn't died. I think it's the idea that the male is the breadwinner, the female stays home, takes care of the home. I also think there's a little bit of internally, men sort of tend to reward, themselves, their friends, that kind of thought.
There's a tradition in it, I would say, first and foremost. And I've had CEOs of large corporations admit this to me. There is still a presumption that the man is the breadwinner in a family. Men who are CEOs, and even women who are CEOs, have confessed to me that they are worried that they will hire a woman and she will then take maternity leave. So one of the huge obstacles is a lack of paternity leave. I mean, men, I think, are intellectually capable enough to take care of children. I don't know. We don't have any evidence one way or the other. But I am confident that men would be just as good caregivers of children as women are, just as we have found that women are just as good surgeons as men are. So I'm not sure why that has perpetuated, but the first reason is tradition. We've always paid women less with the assumption they weren't going to stick around. Social norms that show women as predominantly caretakers whose job is to connect. Those social norms allow us to ignore structural inequities and feel that things like maternity leave rather than paternity leave or some combination are natural, when in fact they're not. They're absolutely not. I also think a secondary component is the economic distress that the United States has, the gap between the wealthy and the poor. We know that rights are tied to economics. So it's hard for a woman to stand up for herself when there isn't a job that pays well. So even though as a white woman who has a PhD, who has tenure at a university and makes a decent living, I can take more risk. I can stand up and throw a fight when someone is disregarding my gender or not attending to an issue that's gender focused. However, I am a white woman in an upper middle class job with a very high level of education and social competence to be able to find a new job, to network, to use my connections that are also either all upper middle class or upper class to get another job. That is not the case if I'm earning $8 an hour, right? Mm-hmm. So there's also an economic component. We need to fix both. Fixing one will fix the other.
Okay, so have I noticed any progress? I would say initially, not so much. So 30 years ago, not really. But I would say as of late, I think I'm seeing corporate America kind of take a stance and recognize the fact that there's all different individuals, not necessarily gender, but ethnics, et cetera. And they've started this whole campaign towards diversity and inclusion. So it's not necessarily gender specific, but just ethnic, everything. It's all pulled into one. So yes, I think corporate America is recognizing that there is some inequality, and they're trying to right that wrong, or they're at least trying to cover their behinds with regard to that.
I think it's the freedom with which women are beginning to speak about it. Even before the Me Too movement, I saw a greater comfort of women being able to say, hey, fuck you. Like, don't call me honey sweetie baby, right? I remember my first position here, when I became the assistant professor. I was 27. And my colleague, my boss would always say, like, hey little lady, hey sweetie, come to my office, I want to talk with you about your syllabus. Or what was my favorite? Hey little miss. Whereas my colleague, who had just started the year before me, was at the same rank and the same point in his career, had never experienced that. Well, I just sort of sucked it up because I didn't have a model. Whereas I see now more and more women who are a little bit younger than me getting comfortable with calling people on it. They're not comfortable, but they're doing it more than I would have done it, more than I felt, because I would never have felt supported. I felt certain that if I had said something, I would have been, either fired or sort of pushed out, or there would have been some sort of retaliation. I think that I see more and more, particularly the millennials, who I adore, the willingness to intervene also on each other's behalves.
Okay, this is a real easy question. I would say no. For me personally, I've never felt like I had to, give up something in my personal life for work. And I will say this because I've started working part-time after my family was born. So I had a great employer at the time that worked with me, wanted me back, and made sure that it was comfortable for me to have a family, work, and make the two blend very well.
Definitely. Recently was our busy season at work, and I was told by my boss that we couldn't take any time off, and I was okay with that, but then he started taking time off, and it's kind of frustrating because I missed out on a lot of things in my personal life and with my family during that time when he was taking time off, and it just didn't seem like it was very fair at that time.
Yes. Yes. There is a constant guilt that I feel when I am failing to keep it all together because I can't. One of the biggest regrets I had is that I received a fellowship for a year-long research project out of the country when I was in my late 20s. And I didn't take it because I didn't understand how I could balance everything. It's a perfect example. From little things like the social shame that comes when someone rolls into your house for an evening and the laundry is hanging on a chair in the living room, they never look at Dave and go, they just look at me and go, as if that were, my job
Right.
to handle it. So there's the responsibility to balance things. I will say this, the biggest frustration I have with that now that I have balanced it is that I balance it by outsourcing my domestic labor to women who don't have the financial security that I do, and that is so frustrating to me. So on the one hand, I found a solution to the pressures of keeping all of my responsibilities in order, but they are on the backs of other women, and that is absolutely frustrating to me.
Honestly, I don't think that our company has done a very good job at that, and it's hard because how our company is set up is the owners, the CEOs, and all of management, they're all males, and the department I'm working in is mainly females. So with management being all males, you would think that they'd want to enforce more like the importance of gender equality in the workplace, but they have not. We've had no discussions on that subject at all.
So we have a Title IX coordinator. She's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first time we've had one. When we have a gender-based issue, we no longer have to go up a chain of command. We go straight to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she is empowered to work outside of the structures of our university. She does it for students and she does it for faculty. She does it for any member of the university system. She protects us. That is one of the great benefits of being in a university as opposed to corporate America, is that we are protected by Title IX. Without that, I don't know. So I can say yes, in part because my workplace doesn't have a choice, but my workplace has also been really actively pursuing best practices. So it's not that they did lip service. They actually hired a Title IX coordinator who's fantastic, who takes her job seriously, and works to educate the faculty about our rights and responsibilities. I think that's great. But I don't think that every workplace can say that their HR person works outside of the corporate structure, would risk his or her, who's empowered to go against the interests of the organization if there is a breach. In some ways it's getting better. You see more women in different fields. We also see it, in some cases, an exodus of men in fields. So there's multiple types of gender inequity that create problems. We have fields that are predominantly female and fields that are predominantly male. We're starting to see less of that as more and more women and men are mixing. What we're seeing is more of women going into masculine-dominated fields, however, and fewer of men going into female-dominated fields. What we find is that when a man will go into a female-dominated field, he's often promoted more quickly, right? put in charge. So those are two different types of gender segregation that happen in the workplace. But I think because women have worked so hard to educate themselves, that we are now an undeniable and very public contributors to the workforce.
So I think that women are really overlooked in higher level positions, and specifically if we look at my company, like I stated before, all the management and the owners and the CEOs of our company are all male. And just like in other companies all across the United States, most management is all male. And I think that there are so many women out there that are qualified, or even more qualified than men, but they're just overlooked for these positions. And so I think that the next step is for men to take women more seriously for these positions, because they're qualified and they can do the job just as well as men can.
I would say I'm hopeful that there is. What that fix is, I'm not exactly sure, but I know having dialogue about it and talking and educating women about what their potential opportunities are, and making making headway towards that. But I guess the fix would be having 100% equality, and I don't know if we'll ever get there, at least possibly not in my lifetime, but I'm hopeful.
Yes, leave male organized organizations. I think that women need to mass exodus these organizations and create their own space. I don't think that we can trust men to understand our standpoint. I don't think they feel what we feel. I don't think they see what we see. It's really evident that they are not our allies. I think the Me Too movement has proven that. I think every time a man said, "Oh, I didn't notice it was happening," and oftentimes was lying, or "I didn't think it was that big of a deal," or "Oh, I didn't realize that, making a woman watch me masturbate into a potted plant was a problem," we realize that it's going to be quicker for us to go around them than to educate them. And as women are starting to own their own companies and creating their own corporate cultures and creating their own systems, sadly, I wish it weren't the case, but I think the way around this is just us walking by the men who are blocking our path. Create the organizations that give us the things that we need. Create the organizations that do things like give equal access to family leave. Create the organizations that have no tolerance for sexual misconduct. I hate that word. It makes it seem so benign. Oh, it's just some misconduct, like Eddie throwing sand in the sandbox. I think that we have to do these things. I think that we just have to create our own spaces and our own work worlds.
The process of gender equality has been slow, with the only real progress being made over the last several decades. While there is still a lot of progress to be made, hopefully one day women get the respect they deserve.
Her resume may look just like his, but because the name is Jane and not Joe, employers may not give hers a second look.